With Nintendo's new system, the Switch, on its way, and its lineup of games being, well, a little bit lackluster, at least in my opinion and many others, I thought about all the other older Nintendo systems and the games they launched with, and I thought it'd be fun to go back to the classic original NES, look at all the games it launched with, and rank each of them. So for this week's countdown, we're ranking and counting down every one of the original NES launch titles. By far, my least favorite of the launch games on the NES is Tenyard Fight. This is one of the worst football games on the console. LJN's NFL may be a little bit worse and a little bit slower, but wow, Tenyard Fight is ridiculously slow. It's also just not very fun to play. It's easy to manipulate the AI, and as it was trying to replicate football on the NES, it just didn't do a good job. There were a lot of sports titles when the NES launched, and Tenyard Fight was easily the worst. A few of the reasons why the NES was able to even get a foothold here in North America after the video game crash of the early 80s was the fact that it was bundled more as a toy, featuring the Zapper and of course Rob the Robot. And while there was only 2 games made for Rob, the worst of the 2 is easily Stack Up. Not only playing with actually Rob is one of the slowest playing games, it can't even really be played without Rob. There's not much gameplay to really be had at all, and just makes for a very kind of awkward and boring overall experience. If you're gonna play any game with Rob the Robot, you're going to want to play the other one. Like I said, there's a lot of sports titles when it comes to the NES launch, and baseball is another one that just really wasn't all that great. It was really slow. It did replicate the sport, though, a lot better, I think, than what Tenyard Fight was able to do, but still, out of all the baseball titles that would later come out for the system, baseball just, well, kind of falls underneath the rest and ends up being outshined by pretty much every other title on the system. While Stack Up was just an overall bland experience, Gyromite provided a much more action puzzle-solving element, being much more akin to other classic NES titles. You did have to use 2 controllers if you didn't want to play with Rob the Robot himself, but overall this was still a fun and enjoyable game even without using the peripheral of the robot itself. Overall, I've always loved Gyromite. I like the look of it and the characters, and still go back and play it randomly today. After recently going back and playing Donkey Kong Jr. Math for the first time in a long time, I found that the game actually has a lot more to offer than I thought. It can be played 2 players with 2 people competing against one another, which actually can make it a little bit of a fun game, especially if you can get a couple buddies together that want to compete against one another. It also has a lot to offer as far as the math equations go, with multiple different playstyles and modes, and even though it is an edutainment game, honestly, Donkey Kong Jr. Math is better than what you probably think it would be. Well, another one of the sports titles, I feel like of all of them, Tennis ended up getting things a little bit more right. It's a more simplistic game than more complicated baseball and football. I mean, you just have the 2 people batting something back and forth, like an advanced Pong at this point, but I think they ended up replicating the game pretty well. It's also one of the funner 2-player games that ended up coming out at the launch. While overall it will still get as bland and boring as the other early launch sports titles, Tennis I still think does the best job of representing the sport that it's based off of. The only reason why I'm putting golf a little bit ahead of tennis was just the overall scope. I found that the game had a little bit more to offer as far as its presentation and the overall length, having the full course for you to actually play through. It also was the first golf title that I ended up playing, and while I'm not an avid golfer by any means, I actually do enjoy playing golf-related video games, so golf has a special place in my heart. It's pretty slow if you decide to actually go back and play golf on the NES nowadays, and there are a few other golf games that are a bit better on the NES, but golf is still a classic to me. Now this is where we start to get into the much funner titles. Wrecking Crew is one of those ones that doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but actually can be a lot of fun. It also has the lengthiest amount of levels, I think, of any of the launch titles, as it has so many levels and customization options and just overall fun of kind of go up and down the ladders, destroy the walls, watching out for enemies, and while it may not really be that fondly remembered, Wrecking Crew is still a really fun early NES experience. Of all the early NES titles, this one's probably forgotten the most, and that is Clu Land. The game can be a lot of fun, though, if you're able to master the controls, moving your character around the puzzle maze-like area that you're in, grabbing onto the pegs, and then quickly swinging in order to collect all the objects while watching out for the game's enemies. When you're able to finally get a hang of how things end up working, there is fun to be had in the action and puzzle-like element that is Clu Land. There was only a couple of racing-like games in the early NES days, and one of the ones that isn't as talked about is Mach Rider. Now this game is one of those behind-the-vehicle perspectives, similar to a lot of classic arcade games of the time, like Outrun, and of course later on with Rad Racer. But Mach Rider has you controlling, well, a motorcycle, going and weaving in and out of the streets, watching out for all the rocks and other vehicles that are in your way with some really cool colors. The game also had a customizable option to make custom courses, along with already what was defaultly in the game. There's actually surprisingly a lot here for a very early NES title, and even though it's not as good as other racing games that would come later, Mach Rider is still pretty fun. I couldn't decide which one of these two I ended up liking a little bit better than the other, so I decided to put them here as kind of a tie, and that is Wild Gunman and Hogan's Alley. Of course, there's the classic Wild Gunman appearance in Back to the Future, but both Hogan's Alley and Wild Gunman presented a lot of fun when it came to the zapper or light gun, getting you used to how everything worked, the timing and aiming, and overall, while there wasn't a ton to either one of these games, I still ended up having a lot of nostalgic fun, blasting my way through the cowboys and trying to become the best policeman I could in Hogan's Alley. While many wouldn't probably put it up as high as I'm putting it, Pinball is one of my favorite of the early NES games. I put so many hours into this game, and even more when it ended up being an unlockable game in Animal Crossing on GameCube years later. It's a very basic pinball experience, but has some really fun elements to the table. I like the whole little eggs that end up hatching into the chicks, the seals, and of course the mini game where you get to control Mario and try to save Pauline that's over on the top portion of the screen as she's running back and forth. Overall, it's not the best pinball game by any means, but it's one of the first ones I played, and I will always love pinball. Another one of the early NES games that was kind of forgotten until it ended up kind of resurging with the release of Super Smash Bros. Melee, and that is Ice Climbers. This game is still really fun, though difficult to master. The platforming is far from perfect, with kind of a weird momentum system when it comes to the jumps, but overall trying to quickly platform your way up each and every one of the mountains as they progressively get harder, and of course trying to get the bonus on the pterodactyl at the top is actually still pretty fun to go back and play, and I wish, honestly, they had expanded on the whole Ice Climbers universe and released later games in the series, but still, after Melee and going back and playing this game, I will always love Ice Climbers. The kind of game that didn't feature a lot of depth, but had hours of fun, the original Duck Hunt. It is still fondly remembered and mentioned. Of course, seeing Duck Hunt in the new Super Smash Bros. Game is really cool, and overall was the game that made me love the Zapper. I spent so many hours trying to just master not only the Duck Hunt portion, but also the Clay Pigeons. Both modes were actually really fun to me, and I was trying to get better and better, but eventually the ducks just got a little bit too fast for me, and I was never able to fully finish everything. And of course, no one will ever forget the dog laughing and mocking at you when you actually ended up missing the ducks. Overall, one of the all-time classics of the 8-bit era. It was hard to decide on my top 3, but I decided to go with Excitebike at the number 3 position. And the main reason for this is with me and my friends would actually spend hours creating courses and having each other mess with them. Unfortunately, there was no save option, so all our hours of work would go for nothing. But I also still really enjoy the very simplistic motorcycle racing that was presented there. Mastering to be able to use the turbo but not using it too much, landing the bike just right so that you wouldn't end up crashing, and of course going in and out of the lanes in order to knock the other riders off their bike. It's very simplistic, but there's a lot of fun to be had in the classic Excitebike. One of the first action-oriented games I ever played, Tongfu. Very simple, just going left or right, trying to save your girlfriend from an evil menace that's kidnapped her, and just punching and kicking every little enemy that gets into your way, increasing in difficulty as you go from floor to floor. And while it's a very short experience, once you're able to master everything, probably no one that grew up in the era will forget their time with good old Kung Fu. There was, of course, no doubt what was going to be number one, the original Super Mario Bros. This is the game that kind of saved gaming in a way, because it was the killer app to have when the NES ended up coming out. Everyone has probably played Super Mario Bros. Or knows of the existence of this game, making it one of the most iconic video games ever produced. It also introduced me to platforming games, and I instantly fell in love with gaming because of Super Mario Bros. It was the very first game I ever had my hands on, and instantly made me a gamer for life. Heck, I may not be standing here doing this video now if it wasn't for Super Mario Bros., and that's why I have to have it at the #1 spot for launch games when the NES came out. So there you have it, all of the original NES launch titles ranked from the worst to the best. Of course, this is based on the North American list. Yes, the European list was a little bit different. Japanese list was only 3 games as it came out a few years before we got in North America. If it had launched the same year, we wouldn't have had as quality titles or as many. So it's a little bit skewed when it comes to what actually was the launch or not, but what came out in North America in October of 1985 were these 18 games that I just ranked, and they went down in history and kind of saved console gaming as we knew it in North America, and became some of the all-time classics. So anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this countdown. If you'd like to see me rank any of the other systems, maybe Nintendo or otherwise, as far as the launch titles go, let me know down in the comment section below. It's something I think that would be actually kind of fun to do. But anyway guys, thank you for watching this video, and of course I hope you enjoyed.